What's going on, everyone? I'm back, and with week 2 in the books along with Monday Night Football, as always, I'm coming at you today with my waiver wire pickups for week 3. There's some really interesting names out there, especially at the running back position following some injuries, so let's get right into it. Starting with the quarterback position, I want to talk a guy in Andy Dalton who, along with that Cincinnati offense, has looked good just like a lot of people were predicting they would be in a bounce-back effort from last year. This last week versus a good Baltimore defense, Dalton put up 265 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Now, I realize that might most likely be his ceiling in terms of possible points and performances, but look, he's looked good, that offense has looked good, and they get a matchup versus the Panthers where the Panthers are without some key pieces defensively, offensively on the O-line. That secondary, as has been the issue for the Panthers for a long time, can be exposed. So look, even without Joe Mixon there, I think Andy Dalton will have a lot of success, and I like him as a flex guy for this week. Continuing on, next I have got Matt Ryan, who versus the Panthers finished with 272 yards, passing 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, but he also had 2 key rushing touchdowns. Now look, that rushing attack isn't necessarily a big part of Matt Ryan's arsenal, so that was a little bit of an outlier. I don't expect it to continue too much. Maybe there's a higher chance for it to continue while Devonta Freeman is out, I will say that. But look, regardless of this, Ryan and the Falcons get a nice matchup, home matchup versus the divisional opponent, New Orleans Saints. Those two teams usually find themselves in shootouts, and I think Matt Ryan is going to go ahead, benefit from this. That entire Atlanta offense, especially the pass catchers, will benefit from this. I do think Tavon Coleman maybe is a little bit of a downgrade from Devonta Freeman, so I anticipate Matt Ryan picking up the bulk of any of that kind of slack in that area. So that'll translate itself into the passing game. And again, I see Matt Ryan as a really nice quarterback moving forward. Something that I was mentioning after the Philadelphia game, don't sweat it too much. He will have his bounce back game. That entire Atlanta offense will bounce back, and you will see it going forward. And the final name on this quarterback list, a week too late, and I'm going to eat my humble pie here because I've got Ryan Fitzpatrick, who, man, he shattered all expectations that I had versus the Philadelphia Eagles. 402 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. I thought he would struggle mightily versus that Philadelphia defense, but not only did he have a great day, but the Bucs also went ahead and beat the Eagles. Great win, great performance, and look, whether Fitzpatrick will continue to be the starter once Winston returns or not, that's still to be seen, but this is potentially the last game he could remain that starter, and I think he's going to give the Bucs a lot to think about. He gets the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers haven't looked that great defensively. I think this can be another type of shootout similar to what we saw versus Pittsburgh and Kansas City. And man, it's really nice to see Fitz airing it out. That's why we see a lot of value in guys like a Deshaun Jackson that maybe we didn't see last year. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to roll with him if he's available. If people were wavering on him because, you know, they didn't really like the matchup, go ahead, scoop him up. I do think Fitzpatrick will have a nice week. Getting to our running backs, even though it might be a short list, I do think that both of these guys can be difference makers going forward for a longer period of time. And first and foremost, starting with Gio Bernard. Look, this is a direct result due to that Joe Mixon knee injury. He'll likely be out 2 to 4 weeks. That is the expectation. And in that time, I fully expect Gio Bernard to be the lead guy for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was getting all those touches while Mixon was out in that game versus the Ravens. He finished with 6 carries for 27 yards and then 4 catches for 15 yards. Definitely a guy that is more valuable in PPR leagues. He's a great pass catcher. And look, if you were someone that went ahead and handcuffed Gio Bernard, good on you. Because now you don't have to worry about whether you're going to be able to get him, because I really do think with Joe Mixon out, Bernard becomes a top 15 running back, especially in PPR formats. If you can, go ahead, snag him up. He would be at the top of my waiver wire priority for this week without a doubt. The second name on this list, I've got Clement of the Eagles. And now look, he was a factor in that game versus the Bucs because Jay Ajayi did get hurt. He finished for 6 carries, 30 yards, 1 touchdown. But what really impressed me here is the 5 catches for 55 yards. And while Jay Ajayi did return and he will likely play next week, Darren Sproles is the reason why I've got Corey Clement here, because Darren Sproles also not 100%, and if he's not available in week 3, I think Corey Clement, again, more geared towards those PPR formats, is going to be a nice little flex appeal option, especially with those 5 catches for 55 yards. I do think he's going to spell Jai at some points as well. So with that being said, I like the potential of Corey Clement. If you can go ahead and get him as that flex option, good on you. The last running back on this list is Matt Breida of the 49ers, who I think finally had that game where we're going to go back and look at and say, this is where these 2 running backs in Alfred Morris and Breida separated themselves in week 2, because he had 11 attempts for 138 yards and 1 touchdown. He looked better as a runner in general. He still had 3 receptions for 21 yards as well, so it gets you a nice little boost in PPR formats as well. And on top of this, he gets that mouth-watering matchup versus the Kansas City defense that has been giving up points galore. I really do think if someone wasn't high on that backfield in San Francisco without Jerick McKinnon and didn't want to necessarily worry about that committee, go ahead. If Breida is available, go and get him, because I really do think week 2 is going to be the point in time where we say, now this starting job belongs to Breida. Moving on to our wide receiver list, this one is definitely a little bit longer, and the name I want to kick this off with is Antonio Callaway of the Browns. And again, this is a result of the Josh Gordon trade to the Patriots. Big news, and now the fact of the matter is Antonio Callaway will probably be the wide receiver number 2 for the Browns. All those talks about Jarvis Landry versus Josh Gordon, who would have the better year, well, now those talks are finished. It will for sure be Jarvis Landry. But look, I do think Callaway will fill that Josh Gordon void. And honestly, I think he's going to be probably a big reason why the Browns felt comfortable in releasing Josh Gordon. They invested an early round pick in Callaway, and I do think they have big expectations for him. He finished with 3 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown. And moving forward versus a Jets team that I still think is young and can go ahead and be taken advantage of in some situations, I like Antonio Callaway not only this week, but also moving forward as a guy in the flex position and potentially as a wide receiver number 2. Next, I've got Tyler Boyd of the Bengals, who finished his matchup versus a good Ravens defense with 6 catches for 91 yards and a touchdown. To me, he is the wide receiver number 2 on that team behind AJ Green. And look, again, this is a direct result of what I believe will be a turnaround year for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I do like the matchup versus the Panthers. Thomas Davis, not there. That secondary, still relatively young. And I can see a big day for not only Andy Dalton, for Gio Bernard, but also for Tyler Boyd, because I think the majority of the protection will be thrown AJ Green's way. So that's going to go ahead and give more opportunities for Tyler Boyd to go ahead and expose that Panthers defense that does have a weakness at the secondary. Continuing on, I've got Keelan Cole of the Jags, who I think it's safe to say has emerged as the number 1 wide receiver for Jacksonville. Finished with 7 receptions for 116 yards and 1 touchdown. Now look, I still do have some concerns with the pass catching unit of the Jaguars. I do think a big reason why they had a lot of success was, first and foremost, Blake Bortles probably had his best career day in the NFL. And maybe that was also precipitated by the fact that Leonard Fournette wasn't there, so they had to lean on Blake Bortles to go ahead and have the kind of game that he did to beat the Patriots. Now, I don't think we're going to see that kind of game from Blake Bortles week in and week out, but the fact of the matter is Keelan Cole looks like the number 1 wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and whenever you can go ahead and get the number 1 wide receiver on a team, it's worth taking a chance on. It might be at a flex spot, or it might potentially be at a wide receiver number 2 spot. But look, not only this week, but again, moving forward, I like Keelan Cole as a guy that you should definitely have at least on your bench. Finishing off the list with 2 teammates from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I've got Deshaun Jackson and Chris Godwin. Now, even though DJ had a big game in week 1, it was on limited number of catches, just like it was this week. He still finished with 4 catches for 129 yards and 1 touchdown. Now, if he wasn't picked up because of the tough Philly defensive matchup and because of that big play dependency on his end, I do think you should go ahead and take a chance on him this week because it's going to be the last week Ryan Fitzpatrick is there, and I do think that ceiling for especially Deshaun Jackson is higher when Fitzpatrick is on the field. He likes to take those chances down the field, and he likes to air it out just in general. I think possibly we're seeing that kind of relationship with Deshaun Jackson and Ryan Fitzpatrick where he's becoming his favorite wide receiver, dare I say. But again, a lot of this will depend on what happens after week 3. That's where it'll get really interesting. But now let's look at Chris Godwin, who finished with 5 receptions for 56 yards and 1 touchdown. Now, honestly, I prefer Godwin here because to me, I see him as the more consistent force. He's had touchdowns in 2 weeks straight. And again, versus a Pittsburgh defense that I do think can be exposed, I like both Godwin and Deshaun Jackson for week 3. Looking at our tight ends next, I want to start with Austin Hooper of the Falcons, who finished with 5 catches for 59 yards and 1 touchdown versus the Panthers. And look, I've said it before, I do think the Falcons are going to continue getting better offensively. Matt Ryan will continue to show you that he is a viable starter, especially in fantasy. And I think that's going to translate its way into Austin Hooper's success as well, especially this week versus that Saints defense and generally that Saints matchup where I've said it before, it is a high scoring affair when these two teams get together. I think a lot of these pass catchers will have the ability for opportunities, and I like Austin Hooper as a guy that you can go ahead and stream this week as a tight end option. The second and final name on this list is Jesse James of the Steelers, who finished with 5 receptions, 138 yards, and 1 touchdown. Great performance in what was a shootout, so not surprising that he had a monster day for the Steelers. But again, I think this matchup versus the Bucs can again lend itself to a big scoring game, and I see Jesse James as a guy that can go ahead, benefit from that as well. I think he is the better tight end option than Vance McDonald for the Steelers. I think he's a better pass catcher. I think he's more dangerous down the field. And again, I'm willing to go ahead, take a chance on him, especially with some reports coming out about Antonio Brown not reporting here Monday or Tuesday. Now, it does seem like that is just personal matters, so we'll see. It's something worth keeping an eye on. But if for any reason he might not be available or has less reps in, Jesse James, I do think gets a nice little bump because of that. Looking at our defenses next, it might be a short list, but again, I do think this is because a lot of the elite defenses here in terms of good matchups are owned already, a la the Minnesota Vikings versus the Bills, the Bears versus the Cards, for example, or even the Texans versus a banged-up Titans offense. But enough with that. Let's look at the team that I want to start with in the Cleveland Browns, who are Thursday night going up versus the New York Jets. And look, the Jets have looked good. Sam Darnold, I think, is going to be the best rookie quarterback out of that bunch, but he faces a good Browns defense, especially at the D-line level, and I think that's going to make it a long day for Sam Darnold. I think that's going to lead to some turnovers, and ultimately, I like on a Thursday night, which is usually some low-scoring affairs in Cleveland, I like this matchup to go in the direction of the Browns and ultimately for that Browns defense. The second and final defense that I have is that of the Dallas Cowboys, who had a pretty good showing versus their arch rivals in the New York Giants. They were able to keep them to single digits for the majority of that game, getting late into the fourth quarter with that situation. And now they go up versus a very banged up Seattle offense. We saw what the Bears did versus Seattle, and I think Seattle is going to be, unfortunately, in some low-scoring affairs until guys like Doug Baldwin return. And because of that, I like the matchup here. I think it'll be a low-scoring affair in general, and that's going to lend its way to a good defensive performance on both ends. So with that, we finish up our look at our main waiver wire pickups for this week. And as always, if you guys have any questions, let me hear it in the comments section. Are there names that you would add to this list? Are there guys that you don't feel as comfortable about? Let me know, and I'll make sure to go ahead and give you guys an answer back. And as always, if you guys enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.